The wind howled like a wounded animal, whipping through the skeletal trees of Hollow Peak. Evan adjusted his parka, pulling it tighter against his body as he glanced at the others. The expedition was supposed to be a simple hike to document the abandoned town of Hollow Peak, buried deep in the mountains. But now, with the temperature dropping far below what had been forecasted, our knees crept into his chest. "We should have turned back an hour ago," Lisa muttered, her breath curling in the freezing air. "Nonsense." Carter, their guide, responded. "The old town is just ahead. We're not quitting now." The five of them, Evan, Lisa, Carter, Mark, and Joanna, pressed on, their boots crunching against the thickening snow. Their goal was to reach the ruins of Hollow Peak, an old mining settlement that had been abandoned after a series of disappearances nearly a century ago. The locals in the nearest town had warned them not to go, muttering about the frost-taking souls and voices on the wind. But curiosity had won out, as it always did. After another grueling hour, the fog lifted just enough for them to see it, Hollow Peak. The town sat eerily silent, a collection of decayed wooden buildings leaning against the bitter wind. The snow had swallowed most of the structures, leaving only skeletal remains protruding from the white abyss. "This place is," Mark started but stopped abruptly. The others followed his gaze. In the middle of the town square stood a single, untouched house. Unlike the others, its wooden frame wasn't rotting, and its windows weren't shattered. A warm, golden glow flickered inside, as if a fire had been lit. "Who the hell?" Joanna whispered. "There's no way anyone lives up here," Lisa added. Stepping closer, Carter hesitated. "Maybe someone's using it as a shelter. We should check it out." As they approached, the wind seemed to die down, muffling all sound except for the slow creak of the door as Carter pushed it open. Warm air brushed past them, carrying the scent of burning wood. A fire crackled in the hearth, its glow casting shifting shadows along the walls. It was inviting. "Maybe someone's nearby," Evan suggested. "We should wait." A loud thud cut him off. Something had moved upstairs. Mark's grip on his flashlight tightened. "Did you hear that?" Another thud. Then the slow, deliberate sound of footsteps descending the stairs. Lisa reached for the door. "Guys, I think we should." The door slammed shut on its own. The fire in the hearth flickered, the room dimming as the temperature plummeted. And then, a voice, low and distant, whispered from the top of the stairs. "You shouldn't be here." The footsteps resumed, descending toward them. Evan's breath hitched. The house wasn't abandoned. Something was here with them. The footsteps continued down the stairs, slow and deliberate. Each creak of the wooden steps sent a fresh wave of tension through the group. Evan's fingers dug into his flashlight, his pulse hammering against his ribs. The others were frozen in place, their breath visible in the frigid air. Lisa was the first to move, reaching for the door handle again, only to find it wouldn't budge. "It's stuck," she whispered, tugging harder. Mark aimed his flashlight at the staircase, his hands trembling. The beam illuminated the descending figure, only there was no one there. The footsteps still echoed. "Jesus Christ." Joanna breathed. Carter took a cautious step forward. "Who's there?" he called. His voice wavered despite his best efforts to sound composed. Silence. Then, just as suddenly as they had started, the footsteps stopped. The air in the room thickened, pressing down on them like a weight. Lisa gasped and stumbled backward. "Something's wrong. We need to leave. Now." Evan took a step toward the fireplace, glancing at the mantel. A row of blackened picture frames sat atop it, their glass cracked. One of them held a faded photograph, an old family portrait. A man, a woman, and a child. Their faces had been scratched out, leaving only blank silhouettes. And then, without warning, the fire in the hearth died. The room plunged into darkness. A deep, guttural whisper filled the air, curling around them like an unseen force. "You shouldn't have come." A gust of wind surged through the house, rattling the walls. The windows frosted over, obscuring the outside world. The temperature dropped even further, numbing Evan's fingers. Mark cursed under his breath. "Open the damn door." Carter yanked at it, throwing his weight against the wood. It wouldn't give. Then, a shadow moved. It wasn't just a trick of the dim light. Something shifted in the darkness near the staircase. A shape, taller than any of them, its form flickering like mist caught in a storm. It didn't have eyes, yet Evan could feel it watching. A sudden, sharp crack rang out as the picture frame on the mantel shattered. The glass splintered across the floor. Joanna screamed, and just like that, the door burst open. They didn't hesitate. One by one, they ran into the night, the cold air burning their lungs as they sprinted away from the house. The wind roared around them, nearly drowning out the sound of the door slamming shut behind them. No one spoke as they gasped for breath. Lisa finally broke the silence. "Tell me we're leaving." Carter wiped the sweat from his brow, his breath shaky. "We came for the town. Not just one house." Evan looked back at the darkened house. The warm glow was gone. The windows were nothing but black voids. And yet, in the frost-covered glass, something moved. Something inside was still watching. And it wasn't alone. The group stood in the freezing night, their breaths coming in ragged gasps. The air had turned bitterly cold, colder than it had been before they entered the house. It clung to their skin, seeping into their bones. Evan finally broke the silence. "We need to get back to the inn," nobody argued. They set off down the snow-covered road, their flashlights barely cutting through the thickening mist. The silence was unnatural. No wind, no rustling trees, not even the crunch of snow beneath their boots. It was as if the whole town was holding its breath. Lisa walked close to Evan, her hands shaking despite her thick gloves. "Something was in that house," Evan nodded. "I know." Carter, leading the group, suddenly stopped. His flashlight flickered. "Wait, where's the road?" They all turned, scanning the area. The path that had led them to the abandoned house just minutes ago was gone, swallowed by the thickening snow and mist. Joanna's voice wavered. "This isn't right." A distant crunch echoed through the stillness. Something was walking in the snow. Mark turned his flashlight toward the sound. The beam cut through the fog, revealing nothing. Just empty, snow-covered ground. Then, another crunch. "Closer, who's there?" Carter called out, his voice forced. Silence. Then, the mist shifted. A figure stood just beyond the reach of their lights. A tall, gaunt shape, its limbs too long, its head tilted at an unnatural angle. It didn't move. It didn't breathe. Evan's heart slammed against his ribs. "We need to run. Now." The group didn't hesitate. They turned and sprinted through the snow, the cold burning their lungs. The mist thickened around them, swallowing their surroundings. Lisa tripped and fell. Evan skidded to a stop, grabbing her hand and pulling her up. "Keep moving," he urged. Behind them, the footsteps followed. Faster. "Closer." Joanna screamed. "It's right behind us." The inn's warm glow came into view, a beacon in the suffocating darkness. The group barreled toward it, their legs burning. Carter reached the door first, throwing it open. One by one, they tumbled inside, slamming the door behind them. Silenced, Evan pressed his back against the wood, his chest heaving. Joanna sobbed quietly, her hands trembling. Mark peeked through the frosted window. "It's gone." Lisa shivered violently. "No, it's not. It let us go." Carter swallowed hard. "Why?" No one answered. Because none of them wanted to admit the truth. Whatever was out there, it wasn't done with them yet. The inn was eerily quiet. The fire in the hearth crackled softly, its warmth doing little to chase away the cold that clung to them. Lisa wrapped a blanket around herself, still shivering. Evan locked the door, double-checking it before turning back to the group. "What the hell was that thing?" No one answered. Joanna sat on the couch, hugging her knees. "I saw it. Just for a second. Its eyes. They weren't human." Carter ran a hand through his damp hair. "We can't stay here. First thing in the morning, we leave Hollow Peak." Mark scoffed. "And go where? There's a damn blizzard outside." "Carter, even if we wanted to leave, we're stuck." Lisa clutched the blanket tighter. "Maybe it won't follow us in here." Evan wasn't so sure. The way it had just let them go, that didn't feel right. As if it had more planned for them. An uncomfortable silence settled over the group. The wind howled outside, rattling the windows. For the first time, Evan noticed how wrong the inn felt, like the house they had just escaped. Something was off about it. Carter stood abruptly. "I need a drink." He walked toward the small bar in the corner of the lobby. "Anyone else?" No one answered. Carter sighed and grabbed a glass. But as he turned back to the group, his face went pale. Where's Lisa? They all froze. Lisa had been right there, wrapped in the blanket, shivering on the couch. But now, she was gone. Lisa! Evan called, panic creeping into his voice. He scanned the room, but she was nowhere in sight. Joanna stood, her voice shaking. She wouldn't just leave. Then came the footsteps above them. Slow, deliberate. Mark grabbed a fireplace poker. She went upstairs. Lisa! Carter shouted. No response. Evan didn't wait. He bolted up the staircase 2 steps at a time. The others followed, their breaths ragged. The second floor was dimly lit, the hallway stretching into darkness. Lisa's voice echoed from the far end. Soft, faint. Guys. Evan ran toward the sound, reaching the last door in the hallway. It was slightly ajar. He pushed it open. The room was empty. No Lisa, no furniture, just a dark, windowless space that shouldn't exist. Joanna gasped. Where is she? The door slammed shut behind them. And then, Lisa's voice whispered from the walls. Help me. The room was wrong. Evan's breath hitched as he spun around, trying to make sense of it. The walls stretched too high, too dark, too empty. There were no windows, no furniture, just a hollow space swallowing every sound. Lisa's voice whispered from nowhere and everywhere. Help me. Joanna pressed herself against the door, her fingers trembling as she twisted the handle. It won't open. Mark slammed his shoulder into the door. Damn thing won't budge. Carter took out his phone, the screen casting a dim glow. No signal. His voice was tight, his usual arrogance stripped away. Lisa's voice came again, closer. Desperate. Please. I don't want to be here. Evan's stomach twisted. Lisa. He stepped deeper into the room, feeling the air thicken around him. The darkness seemed to move, curling around the edges of his vision. Then, something shifted. A faint outline in the corner, barely visible. A shape curled up on the floor. Evan rushed forward. Lisa. As he reached out, she turned. And Evan's heart stopped. It was Lisa. But her face, her eyes, were wrong. Black pits stared back at him, her mouth slightly open, as if frozen in a silent scream. Her skin looked thin, almost translucent. Joanna choked on a sob. That's not Lisa. Lisa, or whatever wore her face, tilted its head. And then, it crawled toward them. Its movements were unnatural, jerky, broken, as if it had forgotten how to use its limbs. Its fingers curled against the wooden floor, nails dragging in slow, deliberate scrapes. Mark yanked Evan back. Move. They all ran. Joanna pounded on the door. Let us out. The thing behind them let out a sharp, choking breath. A laugh. A sob. Then, the door swung open on its own. They fell out into the hallway, scrambling to their feet. Carter didn't hesitate. He grabbed Joanna and pulled her away from the doorway. Evan turned just in time to see the thing wearing Lisa's face standing in the shadows. It didn't follow. It only smiled. And then, the door slammed shut. The sound echoed down the hallway, rattling the very bones of the inn. Joanna was shaking. That wasn't Lisa. Evan's fists clenched. Then where is she? A beat of silence. Then Mark pointed, his face pale. Guys, look. They turned. Down the hallway, barely visible in the dim light, was a new door. One that hadn't been there before. Lisa's voice drifted from behind it. Clear, urgent. I'm here. Evan's pulse pounded in his ears as he stared at the new door. It looked old, its wood warped and splintered with age. Ice had formed along its edges, frost creeping like veins across the surface. Lisa's voice came again, muffled yet urgent. Please. I'm here. Joanna gripped Evan's sleeve. We can't open that. Carter shook his head. Then what do we do? Just leave her. Evan didn't hesitate. He grabbed the handle. Cold shot through his fingers, searing and unnatural. He jerked his hand away with a hiss. Shit. It's frozen solid. Mark reached into his pocket, pulling out his lighter. Move. He flicked it on, holding the flame against the handle. For a moment, nothing happened. Then, cracked. The frost splintered and melted away. Evan tried again, Gripping the handle and twisting, the door swung open on its own. A gust of freezing air blasted past them, carrying the scent of something long buried beneath ice and time. Beyond the threshold was not another room. It was a forest, Joanna gasped. What the hell? Blackened trees stood twisted and dead, their leafless branches stretching toward a sky that wasn't a sky at all, just endless, shifting darkness. Snow blanketed the ground, undisturbed. Silent. Waiting. And in the middle of it all, Lisa. She stood several feet away, barefoot in the snow, her white nightgown fluttering in an unseen breeze. Her head was tilted slightly, her eyes unfocused. She wasn't moving. Evan's throat tightened. Lisa. She didn't react. Mark stepped forward cautiously. Something's wrong. The air felt heavy, pressing against them. Evan took a slow step inside, and Lisa moved. Not naturally. Not like a person. Her body jerked, her limbs twisting unnaturally as if invisible strings controlled her. Her head snapped up. And her eyes met Evan's. Black pits. A smile stretched across her face. Too wide, too unnatural. You found me. A chill coiled in Evan's stomach. Lisa. She took a single step forward, then another. And then, the snow beneath her split open. Lisa screamed as something dragged her down into the frozen earth. Evan lunged forward. Too late. The ground sealed shut, leaving nothing but untouched snow where she had been. The scream lingered in the air, echoing across the empty forest. Then, silence. Joanna's voice was a whisper. We're not supposed to be here. Carter swallowed hard. We need to go. Now. Evan's fists clenched. Lisa was here. She was real. And something had taken her. But if Lisa was still alive, that meant they had to find a way to bring her back. Evan stared at the untouched snow where Lisa had vanished, his breath coming in short, visible gasps. His mind screamed at him to do something, to dig, to claw at the frozen ground. But his limbs were locked in place. The others were just as frozen, not by the cold, but by fear. Mark broke the silence. That wasn't Lisa. Evan turned on him. What the hell are you talking about? We saw her. Mark shook his head, gripping his lighter so tight his knuckles turned white. That thing looked like Lisa, but it wasn't her. Did you see the way it moved? Did you see its eyes? Joanna wrapped her arms around herself. I don't care what it was. We have to get out of here. Carter's gaze darted around. How? That door we came through. It's gone. Evan whipped around. The doorway that had led them into this impossible forest had vanished, replaced by more skeletal trees and endless white. Trapped. A low cracking sound filled the silence. The group turned as one. The snow. It was shifting. Joanna took a step back. No, no, no. Then the ground split open beneath her. She shrieked as her leg plunged through, vanishing into the snow. Evan lunged forward, grabbing her arm. Hold on. Something pulled from below. Joanna screamed, thrashing wildly. Evan dug his heels in, Carter and Mark rushing to grab her other arm. The force beneath them was strong. For a split second, Evan saw something moving beneath the snow, a shadowed figure, its limbs too long, its fingers tipped with jagged, ice-like claws. Then, the thing let go. The group stumbled back as Joanna was released, gasping and shivering. She clung to Evan, her nails digging into his jacket. It wanted me, she choked out. Mark was already flicking his lighter. No more waiting. We move. Now. They hurried through the endless trees, but no matter which direction they ran, the landscape never changed. The sky remained a black abyss. The air grew colder. Then, a whisper. Evan's steps faltered. The others stopped too, their breath misting in the freezing air. The whisper came again, curling through the trees. Not in one voice, but many. Turn back. Leave, before it wakes. Evan's blood ran colder than the air. Before what wakes? Mark muttered. Silence. Then, a deep, guttural growl. The snow rippled like water. Something massive was stirring beneath the ice. And they weren't alone anymore. The growl rumbled beneath their feet, deep and unnatural, vibrating through the frozen ground like an earthquake waiting to erupt. Evan's breath caught in his throat as the snow beneath them shifted, not in small cracks, but in waves, like something huge was moving underneath. Run, Mark whispered. No one hesitated. They bolted through the skeletal trees, their boots crunching against the frozen ground. The air around them grew thicker, colder, as if the very atmosphere was trying to freeze them in place. Joanna gasped beside Evan, struggling to keep up. It's moving under us. Evan risked a glance down. Shadows swam beneath the snow, dark and twisting, as if they were being watched from beneath a frozen lake. Then, a clawed hand shot up from the icy tea snatched Carter's ankle. Carter barely had time to scream before he was dragged down, his body sinking through solid ice as if it were water. "Carter!" Joanna shrieked, lunging for him. Evan grabbed her, yanking her back just as more hands burst through the ice, jagged and elongated, fingers curling like hooks. Carter thrashed, his eyes wild with terror. "Don't let it take me." Mark dropped to his knees, grabbing Carter's arm. "Hold on." But the thing beneath was stronger. Carter was yanked deeper, his body now chest-deep in the ice, his face twisted in agony. Then, his eyes widened in horror. He wasn't looking at them, he was looking past them. Evan turned, and felt his stomach drop. A figure stood between the trees. Tall, thin, faceless. It wasn't a person. It wasn't even human. Its head was smooth and featureless, its limbs elongated and wrapped in something that resembled tattered black cloth. The only thing visible was its mouth, a jagged, gaping maw that slowly peeled open, revealing rows of needle-like teeth. Evan's entire body locked in terror. The creature raised a single, clawed hand, pointing directly at him. The growl beneath the ice turned into a roar. Carter let out a final, blood-curdling scream, and then, he was gone. Pulled into the ice like he had never existed. The snow sealed over his body in an instant. Joanna fell to her knees, sobbing. Mark clenched his jaw, fists trembling. Evan, he was still staring at the thing in the trees because it hadn't moved. And yet, it was closer. Much closer. The thing in the trees did not move, yet it felt closer, as if reality itself had warped to bring it near. Evan's heartbeat thundered in his ears. His breath curled into the freezing air, each exhale feeling heavier than the last. Joanna trembled beside him, still staring at the snow where Carter had vanished. Mark stood rigid, his hands curled into fists. Then, a whisper. Low. Raspy. A voice that wasn't human. "Come closer." The trees shuddered. Evan's instincts screamed at him to run, but his legs refused to move. Then he noticed something. The shadow beneath the ice, the thing that had taken Carter, was still moving. T hadn't left. It was circling them. A jagged crack formed beneath Joanna's knees. "Joanna, move." Mark lunged, yanking her away just as the ice split open, revealing a black void underneath. Not water. Not ice. Something else. A writhing abyss, filled with limbs and faces, distorted, screaming, frozen in agony. They weren't just looking into a crack in the ice. They were looking into something alive. Joanna gasped, stumbling backward. "What is this? What is this place?" Evan's breath hitched. He knew. The stories. The disappearances. The whispers of Hallow Peak. T wasn't just a haunted town. T was a graveyard, a place where the dead weren't just buried. They were consumed. And something was still feeding. A sharp screech pierced the air. The faceless figure in the trees twitched violently, as if it was breaking apart, and suddenly, there were more. 2.5 and 10 dozens of thin, faceless creatures, their blackened forms moving toward them without a sound, their mouths peeled open, all whispering the same words. "Come closer." Mark grabbed Evan's arm, voice raw with panic. "We have to move, now." But the moment Evan turned to run, the ice collapsed. All three of them plunged downward, into the frozen abyss. The fall felt endless. Evan's scream was ripped from his throat as he plunged into the darkness. The cold wrapped around him like 1,000 icy needles, suffocating, smothering. His body twisted, flailing for something, anything, to stop his descent. Then, impact. His back slammed against something solid yet shifting, like landing on a frozen lake that wasn't quite frozen. A jolt of pain shot through his spine, forcing a choked gasp from his lips. Joanna hit next, followed by Mark, both landing with sickening thuds. Silence. Only their ragged breathing filled the void. Evan tried to push himself up, his fingers sinking into the strange, icy surface beneath him. It wasn't normal ice, it was soft, pulsing. Like flesh. A sudden, low groan rumbled beneath them. Joanna scrambled to her feet, her breath coming in panicked gasps. Where are we?" Evan swallowed hard, his gaze darting around. The cavern was massive, stretching far beyond what their flashlight beams could illuminate. The walls moved not from the wind, not from water, but from something alive. Faces. Dozens. Hundreds. Thousands of faces, frozen in agony, embedded into the walls and floor. Their mouths hung open in silent screams, their eyes milky white, their bodies twisted in unnatural shapes. Mark staggered back, his voice barely above a whisper. "They're still alive." One of the faces twitched, then another. A chorus of whispers filled the air, 1,000 voices overlapping. "Join us. Stay and feed." Evan turned, heart pounding. "We have to get out of here," but there was no exit. Above them, the ice had sealed shut. And then, they started to emerge. To the hollow ones, their bodies peeled away from the walls, crawling forward with grotesque, jerking movements. Their faceless heads twitched, their mouths stretching wider than humanly possible. One lunged. Evan barely dodged, stumbling backward as its blackened fingers scraped his arm. A burn seared his skin, not from heat, but from pure cold. Joanna screamed as another one grabbed her leg, pulling her down. Mark swung his flashlight, shattering the creature's arm, but it regenerated instantly. They couldn't fight them, they couldn't kill them, they had to run. Evan turned, searching frantically, until he saw it. A glowing rift in the distance. A tear in the cavern wall, pulsing with a dim, eerie light. "The rift," he shouted. "It's our way out." They ran. The hollow ones shrieked, their movements becoming frantic as they gave chase. Hands reached, clawing, grasping. Evan dove first, hurling himself through the rift just as something grabbed his ankle. Cold, unimaginable cold, rushed through him, his mind screaming as he felt his body being pulled in 2 directions. But then, everything went black. Evan woke up in the snow. The storm had cleared. The sky was a deep, frozen blue. He gasped, sitting up, his breath curling into the air. Joanna and Mark were beside him, shivering, their eyes wide with terror. The Hollow Peak sign loomed in the distance. They had escaped, but as Evan turned to look at the ice beneath them, he saw them. The faces. Still watching. And as he stood, a single whisper brushed against his ear. "You brought something back."